Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The clock on the wall hasn't moved in 47 minutes. I know because I've been counting. Not the seconds, the minutes. Each one stretches longer than the last, like taffy being pulled by invisible hands. But here's the thing that made me start recording this. Nobody else seems to notice. They all just sit there, flipping through the same magazines, crossing and uncrossing their legs, checking phones that never seem to have signal. And that woman in the corner? She's been reading page 32 of that Better Homes and Gardens for the past hour. If you're listening to this right now, comfortable in your bed, maybe about to drift off, I need you to understand something. This isn't just another creepy story about a weird doctor's office. This is a warning, because I found out why no one ever gets called from this waiting room. And by then, it was already too late. The story begins now. My name is Sarah Chen, and 3 days ago I walked into the Meridian Medical Center on Elm Street in downtown Portland. Just a routine checkup, nothing special. The building looked normal from the outside. One of those converted Victorian houses they turned into medical offices back in the 90s. Powder blue paint, white trim, perfectly manicured hedges. I remember thinking the door felt heavier than it should have when I pushed it open, like it was fighting me. But I was already running late, so I didn't give it much thought. The bell above the door chimed. Not a normal electronic beep, but an actual bell. Old-fashioned, kind of charming actually. The waiting room smelled like vanilla candles mixed with that antiseptic medical smell. You know the one. It hits you right in the back of your throat. There were maybe 7 or 8 people already waiting. Nothing unusual about that. Doctors' offices in Portland are always packed. I signed in at the front desk. The receptionist, I want to say her name was Linda, but the nameplate was turned away. She smiled at me with too many teeth. Not literally. She had a normal amount of teeth. But her smile just seemed to use all of them at once. "First time?" she asked, even though I'd clearly written on the form that Dr. Morrison had been my physician for 3 years. "No, I have a 2:30 appointment." She looked at her computer screen. Typed something, looked again. Her smile never wavered. "Oh yes, Miss Chen. Please have a seat. The doctor will be with you shortly." I found an empty chair near the window. One of those uncomfortable wooden things with the worn burgundy cushions. The magazine rack next to me was full of the usual suspects. Time, People, Better Homes and Gardens. All from 2019. I remember checking the dates specifically because my dentist had the same issue. Nobody ever updates waiting room magazines. 20 minutes passed, normal. Doctors always run late, 30 minutes. I shifted in my seat. The wooden armrest creaked. 40 minutes. I looked around the room. That's when I first noticed something was off. The woman directly across from me, mid-40s maybe, wearing a floral dress. She turned the page of her magazine, but her eyes didn't move. They stayed fixed on the same spot on the page, like she was just going through the motions. The elderly man in the corner cleared his throat, shifted his weight, cleared his throat again, shifted his weight again. The exact same movements, the exact same timing, like a GIF on repeat. And the clock. I looked at my phone. 3:17 p.m. I looked at the wall clock. 2:30 p.m. Still 2:30 p.m. "Excuse me," I said to the woman next to me, a younger woman with auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail. "Do you have the time?" She turned to me slowly. Too slowly, like she was moving through honey. "The doctor will be with you shortly," she said, not answering my question. Her voice was pleasant enough, but there was something underneath it, like an echo of an echo. I stood up, walked to the reception desk. "Hi, sorry, I just wanted to check." "The doctor will be with you shortly," Linda said. that same tooth-filled smile stretching across her face. "Right, but it's been almost an hour and—" "Please, have a seat. The doctor will be with you shortly." I opened my mouth to argue, but something in her eyes stopped me. They were wrong. The color was normal. Brown, I think. But they didn't reflect light properly. Like looking at a painting of eyes rather than real ones. I went back to my seat, pulled out my phone, no signal, not even one bar. The Wi-Fi that had been working when I first arrived was gone. I opened my camera app, thinking maybe I'd kill time taking stupid selfies or something. But the screen just showed black, not broken, just black. Like the camera was covered even though it wasn't. That's when I noticed the sounds. Or rather, the lack of them. You know how waiting rooms have sounds? The hum of fluorescent lights, the distant murmur of voices from exam rooms, phones ringing, computer keyboards clicking. This place had none of that. Just the sound of magazine pages turning. That old man clearing his throat. The tick of a clock that wasn't actually ticking. I stood up again. "I'm sorry, I just remembered I have another appointment." "I need to reschedule." Linda's smile somehow got wider. "The doctor will be with you shortly." I walked to the door, grabbed the handle, pulled. Nothing, pushed, nothing. The door, that had felt heavy coming in now, felt like it was sealed shut. Like it wasn't even a real door anymore, just a piece of wall painted to look like one. "The door's stuck," I said, louder than I meant to. Nobody looked up. Nobody acknowledged I'd spoken. They just kept going through their motions. Page turn, throat clear, leg cross. Page turn, throat clear, leg cross. My heart started racing. That fight-or-flight feeling when your body knows something's wrong before your brain catches up. I pulled harder on the door. Nothing. I knocked on it. The sound was all wrong. Muffled, like knocking on a mattress. "Hey!" I shouted. "Hey! Can anyone hear me? The door's stuck." Page turn, throat clear, leg cross. "The doctor will be with you shortly," Linda said from behind the desk. I spun around to face her. "I want to leave, right now. Open this door." Her head tilted slightly, just a few degrees, like a dog hearing a strange noise. "Why would you want to leave? You haven't seen the doctor yet." "Because—" I stopped. Why did I want to leave? It was just a waiting room, just a normal doctor's office, wasn't it? No, it wasn't. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out. But the door wouldn't budge, and nobody would help me, and the clock still read 2:30 and— "Sarah Chen?" I turned. A nurse stood in the doorway to the exam rooms. Scrubs the color of old blood. No, that's not right. They were burgundy, just burgundy, normal burgundy scrubs. "The doctor will see you now," she said. I looked at the door one more time, still sealed, then back at the nurse. She waited patiently, clipboard in hand. What choice did I have? I followed her. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. I know that sounds crazy, but I counted the doors. 7 on the left, 7 on the right, then 7 more on the left, 7 more on the right. The same 7 doors, repeating, each with the same bronze nameplate, each reading Exam Room 3. The nurse walked ahead of me, her white sneakers squeaking against the linoleum in a rhythm that didn't match her steps. Squeak, squeak, pause, squeak. But her feet moved steadily. 1, 2, 1, 2. "How long have you worked here?" I asked, just to hear something besides that off-rhythm squeaking. "The doctor will see you now," she replied without turning around. "That's not what I asked." "The doctor will see you now." I stopped walking. She continued for 3 more steps before stopping too. She didn't turn around. Just stood there waiting. "What happens if I don't follow you?" I asked. Her head turned. Just her head, like an owl, too far, past where a human neck should stop. She looked at me upside down, her body still facing forward. "The doctor will see you now," she said. But this time her voice came from behind me. From the waiting room we'd left, from all the exam room doors at once. I followed her. What else could I do? Finally. She stopped at a door, exam room 3, of course. She opened it and gestured for me to enter. Normal neck position this time. Thank God. The room looked standard, exam table with the crinkly paper, blood pressure cuff on the wall. That poster of the human muscular system that every doctor's office has had since 1987. The one where the man has no skin and he's doing that weird half smile like he's totally cool with it. Please have a seat. The doctor will be with you shortly. The nurse left, closing the door behind her. I sat on the exam table. The paper crinkled. A normal sound. A real sound. I grabbed onto that normalcy like a life raft. My phone still had no signal, but at least the screen worked now. 3:47 p.m. I looked at the wall clock. 2:30 p.m. I tried the door, locked. Of course. The air in the room felt thick, like breathing through a wet cloth. I noticed a window on the far wall, one of those frosted glass ones you can't see through, but something was wrong with the light coming through it. It pulsed, slowly, like a heartbeat. I stood up to look closer. Miss Chen? I spun around. A man in a white coat stood in the doorway. I hadn't heard it open. He was ordinary, aggressively ordinary. Medium height, medium build, brown hair, brown eyes. The kind of face you'd forget the moment you looked away. "I'm Dr. Morrison," he said, extending his hand. "No, you're not." The words came out before I could stop them. Because I knew Dr. Morrison. I'd been seeing him for 3 years. He was tall, black, had a gray beard, and always wore colorful bow ties. This man's ordinary face didn't change expression. "I'm Dr. Morrison," he repeated, hand still extended. I didn't take it. He lowered his hand, walked to the small desk in the corner, sat down, opened a chart. My chart, presumably. "So, what brings you in today?" he asked. "My annual checkup, but I want to leave." "Now," he made a note. "Anxiety, paranoia, interesting? I'm not paranoid. This place is wrong. You're wrong. That nurse's neck. Ah, yes, Nurse Patterson. She's double-jointed, quite flexible." He smiled. Too many teeth, just like Linda. "I want to leave," I said firmly. "After the examination." "No, now." He made another note. "Tell me, Sarah, may I call you Sarah? When did you first notice that things felt wrong?" I didn't answer. Something about the way he asked, like he genuinely wanted to know, like it was important data. "Was it the clock?" he continued. "Most people notice the clock first, or the magazines. The smart ones notice the door right away, but you waited. Why? What is this place?" He tilted his head. That same dog-like tilt Linda had done. "It's a waiting room, a place where people wait. For what? To be called. But no one ever gets called. They just sit there doing the same things over and over." "Oh, they get called, eventually. Everyone gets called." He stood up, walked toward me. "The question is, what are they called for?" I backed up until I hit the wall. The muscular system poster crinkled behind me. "Some waiting rooms," he said, stopping just out of arm's reach, "are for appointments. Some are for opportunities, some are for judgment. And some..." He smiled again. "Those teeth seem to go on forever. Some are for collection." "Collection of what?" He reached past me. I flinched, but he just straightened the poster. "Time, Sarah. We collect time." The room suddenly felt colder. "What?" "Think about it. All those minutes, all those hours spent waiting. Where do they go? They have to go somewhere. Conservation of energy, basic physics. That's insane. Is it? You've been here for..." He checked his watch. 87 minutes, but on your phone, only 20 minutes have passed. Where did those 67 minutes go? I looked at my phone. 3:50 p.m. 3 minutes since I'd last checked, but it felt like we'd been talking for at least 10. "We collect them," he continued. "Store them. Use them." "For what?" His ordinary face rippled, like water disturbed by a stone. For just a moment, I saw something underneath. Something old. Something hungry. That's not for you to know. Now, shall we begin your examination? No. I sidled toward the door. I'm leaving. The door is locked, Sarah. Then I'll break the window. What window? I turned. The frosted glass window was gone. Just a smooth wall where it had been. Now, he said, pulling on latex gloves that appeared from nowhere. Let's check your blood pressure. He moved faster than anyone should be able to move. One moment he was by the desk, the next his fingers were wrapped around my wrist. Not painful, just firm, inevitable. Your pulse is elevated, he said, pressing 2 fingers against my wrist. 120 beats per minute. That's quite high. I tried to pull away. Might as well have tried to pull away from a statue. Each beat, he continued, is a moment. Thump, thump. 2 moments, thump, thump, 2 more. So much time, just flowing through your veins. His fingers were cold through the latex gloves. Too cold, like pressing ice against my skin. Did you know, he said conversationally, that the average human heart beats about 115,000 times per day? That's 115,000 moments. 115,000 tiny slices of time. Most people waste them. Let them slip away unnoticed. But here. He smiled, that too many teeth smile. Here, we notice every single one. The room started spinning. No, not spinning, pulsing, in rhythm with my heartbeat. Stop, I gasped. Oh, we're just getting started. He released my wrist, walked back to his desk. Tell me, Sarah, have you ever lost time? Sat down to do something and suddenly hours have passed? Driven home and can't remember the journey? Fallen asleep and woken up feeling like no time has passed at all? I didn't answer, but he nodded as if I had. Those are natural collection points, moments when time slips. We've just learned to create our own. The waiting room, I whispered. Exactly, very good. Waiting rooms are perfect. People expect to lose time there. They come prepared to waste it, to give it away, and we're happy to take it. But why? What do you do with it? His ordinary face rippled again. Longer this time. I saw wrinkles, liver spots, hair gone white and thin, then young again, cycling through ages like flipping through a photo album. We feed, he said simply. The poster behind me rustled. I turned. The skinless man wasn't smiling anymore. He was screaming. Silently, endlessly. You're not human, I said. Stating the obvious, maybe, but my brain needed to say it out loud. Human? He laughed. It sounded like clocks ticking out of sync. No, but we were, once, before we learned the secret. Before we discovered that time isn't a river flowing forward. It's an ocean, and those who know how can swim in any direction. He stood up, walked toward me again. With each step, the room grew darker. Not dimmer, darker. Like the light itself was being drained away. The first waiting room was created in 1147, he said. A monastery in France. The monks would sit for hours waiting to be called for prayers. So much time. So much delicious, willing donation of moments. We fed for centuries before anyone noticed. We? Oh yes, there are many of us. In every city, every town, wherever people wait, we feed. DMVs are particularly nutritious. Airport terminals, hospital emergency rooms. So much anxiety. So much desperation. It seasons the time, you see, makes it richer. He was close now. Too close. I could smell him. Vanilla and antiseptic and something else. Something like old paper, like dust, like entropy itself. But doctors' offices, he whispered, are our favorite. Because here, people wait for answers, for hope, for fear to be confirmed or denied. That anticipation, it's like wine to us, aged to perfection. The people in the waiting room are still waiting, have been for, oh, let me check. He pulled out a pocket watch The face had too many hands. They all moved in different directions. The woman with the magazine, 43 years, the old man, 67. Linda at the reception desk has been smiling for over a century. You're lying. Am I? When did you arrive, Sarah? Today? Yesterday? Last week? Check your phone. I did. The date was wrong. 3 days later than when I'd walked in. 3 days. No, I breathed. Oh yes, you've been here for 3 days, sitting in that waiting room, going through the motions. Page turn, leg cross, check phone, just like the others. Until something woke you up, made you notice. What woke me up? His smile faltered, just for a moment. That's the interesting question, isn't it? You shouldn't have woken up. Once the collection begins, once you settle into the pattern, you should stay asleep. Aware, but not aware. Conscious, but not conscious. The perfect state for harvesting. So, why did I wake up? He studied me. Those ordinary brown eyes seemed to look through me, into me, past me. There's something different about you, he murmured. Something we didn't account for. I thought about my life. Nothing special. Marketing manager, apartment in Southeast Portland. Cat named Mr. Whiskers. Weekly yoga class. Nothing that would make me immune to whatever this was. Unless, my grandmother, I said suddenly, she used to tell me stories about things that steal time, about places where moments go to die. I thought they were just fairy tales. Dr. Morrison, or whatever he really was, took a step back. Your grandmother. What was her name? Chen Mei Ling. He hissed, actually hissed, like air escaping from a punctured tire. The keeper of minutes. We thought her line had ended. She died when I was 12. But she taught you, prepared you, even if you didn't realize it. He backed toward the door. Stay here. Don't try to leave. It won't work anyway. He left. The door clicked shut behind him. Locked, of course. I was alone with the screaming, skinless man, and the clock that still read 2:30. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. Fairy tales she'd told me, about the collectors, about the waiting places, about how to break free. The secret, she'd said, her English accented but clear, is to stop waiting, to refuse to give them what they want, to take back what's yours. Easy to say. Harder to do when you're locked in an exam room that may or may not exist in normal space-time. But I had to try, because somewhere out there my cat was wondering where I'd been for 3 days. My boss was probably furious. My mom had definitely left 17 voicemails, and I'd be damned if I was going to spend eternity turning magazine pages in a waiting room where no one ever gets called. I closed my eyes, tried to remember more of my grandmother's stories. She'd always told them in Mandarin, switching to English when I didn't understand a word. Late at night when I couldn't sleep. Stories about the Yamo who ate nightmares, the Shiguai who stole shadows, and the Shijian Shou Ji Zhe, the time collectors. They cannot take what you don't give, she'd said. Time is yours until you surrender it, but once you give it away, very hard to get back. Okay, so I had to stop giving them my time. But how? I was trapped in this room, in this building that existed outside normal time. Wait, I looked at my phone again. Still no signal, but the clock was working. 4:23 p.m. It had moved. Time was passing, just not in sync with this place. What if... I opened the voice recorder app. Started recording. Testing. My name is Sarah Chen. I am trapped in the Meridian Medical Center on Elm Street. Today's date is... I checked my phone. October 15th, 2024. The time is 4:24 p.m. I played it back. My voice sounded tinny through the phone speaker, but it was there. Proof that I existed. That time was still moving for me, even if everything else was frozen. The door rattled. Not like someone trying to open it, like something testing its strength. Sarah, Dr. Morrison's voice, muffled through the door. What are you doing? I didn't answer. kept recording. I've been here for 3 days. The waiting room is full of people who've been here for decades. They're stuck in loops, repeating the same actions. The clock on the wall reads 2:30 and never changes. Stop that. His voice was sharper now. Worried. Good. The nurse's neck turns too far. The receptionist has too many teeth. The doctor isn't my real doctor. They feed on time. On the moments people lose while waiting. The door rattled harder. Paint flakes fell from the frame. They can't take what I don't give, I continued, and I'm not giving them any more time. Something slammed against the door. The whole room shook. The screaming, skinless man fell off the wall, poster crumpling to the floor. I looked at it, really looked at it. The poster was old, water-stained, the corners yellowed with age. How long had it been hanging there? How many patients had sat where I was sitting, staring at it while their time was harvested? An idea formed. I grabbed the poster, smoothed it out on the exam table. The skinless man wasn't screaming anymore, he was pointing at the door. No, past the door, at something beyond. I turned the poster over. On the back, in faded pencil, someone had drawn a map, a floor plan, of the medical center, but different. More rooms than there should be. Passages that couldn't exist in a building this size. And in the center, a room marked with a single word. Source. The door exploded inward. Dr. Morrison stood in the doorway, but he wasn't ordinary anymore. He was everything. Young and old, tall and short, every race and no race, shifting and changing like a TV with bad reception. "You cannot leave," he said, his voice a chorus of every patient who'd ever waited. "You gave us your time. It's ours now." "No," I said, clutching the map. "I'm taking it back." I ran, not toward him. That would have been suicide. I ran to the wall where the window used to be, the wall that shouldn't be there. And I kept running, through the wall. It parted like mist, like it was never really there at all. Because maybe it wasn't. Maybe none of this was real the way we think of real. Maybe it was all just crystallized time, moments stolen and shaped into walls and doors and examination tables. Behind the wall was a corridor I'd never seen before. Not the repeating hallway of exam rooms. This was older. The walls were wood paneling, not drywall. The floor was carpeted in that aggressive orange shag from the 70s. I could hear Dr. Morrison behind me. Not footsteps. Something worse. A sound like calendar pages flipping. Days, weeks, years flying past. I consulted the map as I ran, left at the intersection, right at the water fountain that bubbled with something that wasn't water, up the stairs that went down and down the stairs that went up. The building was bigger on the inside, much bigger. I passed waiting rooms from different eras. One filled with men in fedoras reading newspapers from 1953. Another with women in Victorian dresses, their bustles making it hard to sit comfortably on the wooden benches. A modern one with people staring at smartphones that never loaded anything. All of them waiting. All of them giving their time away, drop by drop. "Sarah?" Dr. Morrison's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. "You can't escape. No one escapes. Time only moves forward." "Wrong," I gasped, still running. "Time is an ocean. You said so yourself. And oceans have tides." I found it. The door marked Source. It was small, wooden, unremarkable. The kind of door you'd walk past 1,000 times and never notice. I grabbed the handle, locked. Of course. Dr. Morrison materialized at the end of the corridor. Not walking. Just there. Then closer still. Stuttering through space like a glitching video game character. "Grandmother," I whispered, "help me." And I remembered. One more story, one she'd only told me once, the night before she died. "The collectors have a source," she'd said, her voice barely a whisper. The first moment. The original weight. Find it, and you can unwind everything. But the cost. She'd never told me what the cost was. Dr. Morrison was 3 feet away. 2, 1. I pressed my phone against the lock, hit play on the recording I'd made. My voice, tinny but real, echoed in the corridor. My name is Sarah Chen. I am here. I am now. This is my time. The lock clicked. I opened the door and stepped through, into a hospital room. Old. Maybe 1940s from the equipment. A man lay on the bed, unconscious. Tubes and wires connected him to machines that shouldn't have existed yet. Machines that kept him suspended between life and death. Between one moment and the next. The first patient, Dr. Morrison said from behind me. He didn't sound angry anymore, just tired. He was supposed to die in 1943, but his family couldn't let go. They made us keep him waiting. Waiting to live, waiting to die, waiting. And in that waiting, we were born. I looked at the man. He was young, maybe 25, a soldier, judging by the uniform hanging on the chair. Every moment he doesn't die, he generates more waiting, more time for us to harvest. He's been dying for 80 years, the perfect patient. This is wrong, I said. Yes, Dr. Morrison agreed, but it's also necessary. Without the waiting, without the collection, time would overflow, puddle, stagnate. We're a necessary evil. No, I said. You're just parasites. I walked to the machines, found the main power cable. If you unplug that, Dr. Morrison said, all the collected time releases at once. Decades of moments, all flooding back. Do you know what that much temporal energy does to a human body? I can guess. It will kill you. I looked at him. Really looked at him, and for the first time, I saw fear in those shifting features. Maybe, I said, but at least it'll be my time. I pulled the plug. The world exploded into moments. Every second I'd lost in the waiting room hit me at once, but not just mine, everyone's. The magazine woman's 43 years, the old man's 67, Linda's century of smiling, all of it flooding through me like water through a broken dam. I screamed, or maybe I laughed. Hard to tell when you're experiencing decades in seconds. I saw it all. Every patient who'd ever waited, every moment stolen. Every life paused while the collectors fed. And underneath it all, the truth. They weren't parasites, they were prisoners. Just like us. The soldier on the bed had been the first, yes, but he hadn't created them. We had. Every person who'd ever sat in a waiting room, angry at the lost time, had fed the spell, had given it power, had created the collectors out of our own impatience, our own fury at time wasted. They were what we made them, and only we could unmake them. The soldier opened his eyes, looked at me, smiled. "Thank you," he whispered, and died. Finally, peacefully, the way he should have 80 years ago. The room dissolved, the building dissolved, everything dissolved except me and Dr. Morrison and the ticking of 10,000 clocks. "What happens now?" I asked. He was fading, becoming ordinary again, becoming human. "Now?" He checked his watch, a normal watch with normal hands. "Now you wait. But this time you choose what for." I blinked. I was standing outside the Meridian Medical Center, the real one. A perfectly normal medical building with perfectly normal people coming and going. My phone buzzed. 17 missed calls from my mom. 3 from my boss. 1 from my neighbor saying she'd been feeding Mr. Whiskers. The date was October 15th, 2024, 2:47 p.m. Exactly 17 minutes after I'd first walked in. I could have gone home, should have gone home, but I walked back inside. The bell chimed. The receptionist, a young man with a normal smile, looked up. "Can I help you?" "I had an appointment," I said. "With Dr. Morrison, the real Dr. Morrison." He checked his computer. "Oh, you're Sarah Chen. I'm sorry, but Dr. Morrison had an emergency. We've been trying to call you. Would you like to reschedule?" "No," I said. "I'll wait." He blinked. "Are you sure? It might be a while." I found a seat, picked up a magazine. Time magazine, ironically, current issue. "I've got time," I said. And for the first time in my life, I meant it. Because here's what my grandmother never told me. What I had to learn for myself. Time isn't something that can be stolen. It can only be given. And when you give it consciously, willingly, with full awareness of the gift, it's not lost at all, it's invested. I sat in that waiting room for 3 hours. Not because I had to, because I chose to. I read every article in that magazine. Had a conversation with an elderly woman about her grandchildren. Helped a young father calm his crying baby. Lived every minute instead of just enduring it. When Dr. Morrison finally called me in, the real Dr. Morrison, bow tie and all, I was almost disappointed to leave. "Sorry about the wait," he said. "Don't be," I replied. "It was worth it." He gave me a strange look but proceeded with the exam. Everything normal. Blood pressure a little high, but whose isn't these days? As I was leaving, I passed the waiting room one more time, and for just a moment, just a trick of the light, I could have sworn I saw them. The magazine woman, the old man, Linda with her too wide smile. But they weren't waiting anymore, they were living. Time isn't a river, it isn't an ocean. It's a choice. Every moment, every second. A choice to wait or to live. Choose wisely, because in the end we all get called. The question is, what are you doing until then? If you made it this far, you felt it, didn't you? That creeping sensation that maybe you've been in a waiting room too long. That maybe time isn't moving the way it should. Check your phone. Check the date. Make sure you haven't lost more than an hour listening to this. And if you have, well, welcome to the club. We meet in waiting rooms everywhere. We're the ones who notice when the clock stops ticking. We're the ones who see when the magazines are too old. We're the ones who know the secret. Time is ours until we give it away. Don't give it away. Unless, of course, you choose to. Sweet dreams. And whatever you do, don't forget to set your alarm. You wouldn't want to lose track of time, would you? Story number 2. The first time I saw one of those nests, I thought it was watching me. Not in the way a security camera watches, or how your neighbor peeks through their blinds. No, this was different. The face in that papery gray nest had eyes that seemed to follow me across my backyard in Millbrook, Tennessee. And the worst part? Those eyes. They looked exactly like my grandmother's. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before you click away thinking this is just another creepy story, let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how nature sometimes creates things that look almost too intentional? Like when clouds form perfect shapes, or tree bark splits to reveal what looks like a screaming mouth? Well, what I discovered last summer makes those coincidences seem like child's play. And if you're listening to this late at night, maybe with your window cracked open, you might want to close it. Because once you know what to look for, you'll start seeing them everywhere. The story begins now. My name is Sarah Chen. And last July, I inherited my grandmother's house in Millbrook, a sleepy suburb about 40 minutes outside Nashville. The kind of place where people still wave at passing cars and the biggest news is when the local diner changes their pie selection. I'd been living in a cramped Chicago apartment for 5 years, working myself to death at a marketing firm. When Grandma Elise passed and left me her 2-story colonial, complete with a wraparound porch and 3 acres of wooded property, it felt like fate. A chance to slow down, work remotely, maybe finally finish that novel I'd been outlining since college. The first few weeks were perfect. I'd wake up to birdsong instead of car horns, make coffee in a kitchen bigger than my entire Chicago bathroom, spend afternoons on the porch with my laptop, pretending to work while actually just breathing in that Tennessee summer air. It was during one of those lazy afternoons that I first noticed something odd about the old oak tree at the edge of the property. There was a wasp nest tucked under one of the lower branches. Nothing unusual about that, except for its shape. From where I sat on the porch, about 30 feet away, It looked almost like... No way, I muttered, setting down my coffee mug. I walked closer. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, casting dancing shadows across the gray, papery surface of the nest. And the closer I got, the more convinced I became that my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. The nest was shaped like a face. Not vaguely, like when you see shapes in clouds. This was detailed, deliberate. There were indentations where eyes should be, a raised bump for a nose, even what looked like lips, slightly parted as if frozen mid-whisper. I stood there for probably 5 minutes, just staring. A few wasps buzzed lazily in and out of what I now realized was the mouth, their entry point. The whole thing was about the size of a basketball, perfectly proportioned, impossibly precise. Okay, that's weird, I said aloud, because talking to yourself is totally normal when you live alone in the countryside. I snapped a few photos with my phone. The camera had trouble focusing at first, like it couldn't quite decide what it was looking at. When I finally got a clear shot and zoomed in, my breath caught. The face in the nest looked familiar, not immediately recognizable, but familiar in that nagging way. Like when you see someone at the grocery store and know you've met them but can't place where. The eyes especially. There was something about the way they were shaped. A wasp landed on my hand. I yelped and stumbled backward, nearly dropping my phone. By the time I looked back at the nest, the afternoon light had shifted, and it just looked like, well, a wasp nest. Unusual maybe, but nothing more. I headed back inside, uploaded the photos to my laptop, and spent the next hour researching. Turns out, wasps are incredibly sophisticated builders. They chew wood pulp and mix it with saliva to create their paper-like nests. The shapes are usually spherical or oval, very rarely anything more complex. I found exactly 0 references to face-shaped nests. Maybe it's just a coincidence, I told myself, minimizing the browser window. Pareidolia, seeing faces where there aren't any. But that night, as I lay in bed listening to the house settle around me, I couldn't stop thinking about those eyes. And somewhere in that drowsy space between waking and sleeping, a thought drifted through my mind like smoke. They looked like Grandma Elisa's eyes. The next morning, I woke up determined to be rational about the whole thing. I made coffee, answered some work emails, and absolutely did not think about the face-shaped wasp nest in my backyard. That lasted about 2 hours. By 10:30, I was back outside with a pair of binoculars I'd found in Grandma's hall closet. Up close, in the bright morning light, the nest looked even more unnervingly face-like. The texture of the paper gave it an almost skin-like quality. And those eyes... I lowered the binoculars, rubbed my own eyes, looked again. Definitely shaped like Grandma Elisa's eyes. That distinctive almond shape. The way they seemed to crinkle at the corners like she was always on the verge of smiling. Okay, this is officially creepy, I announced to no one. I decided to search the rest of the property. If there was one weird nest, maybe there were others. Maybe it was some kind of, I don't know, local wasp mutation, environmental factor that made them build differently. I found the second nest 15 minutes later. It was attached to the underside of the garden shed's eave. Smaller than the first, but just as detailed. This face was different, though. Rounder, with a prominent nose and thin lips pressed into what looked like a frown. My hands shook as I raised my phone to take a picture. Because this face... I knew this face, too. Mr. Garrett. The man who'd lived next door to Grandma for 40 years. He'd passed away last spring, just a few months before her. I remembered him from childhood visits, always grumpy about kids playing too loud, always frowning exactly like the expression captured in the papery gray nest. What the hell? I whispered. I found 3 more nests that day, each one a different face. Each one someone I recognized from old photos in Grandma's albums or from fuzzy childhood memories of visiting Millbrook. Mrs. Patterson, who'd run the local bakery. Tommy Chen, no relation despite the shared last name, who'd delivered mail for 30 years. Agnes Murphy, Grandma's best friend since high school. All of them were dead. All of them had died within the last 2 years. By the time the sun started setting, I was sitting on the porch with a glass of wine, my laptop open to a Word document where I'd been trying to make sense of what I'd found. The page was mostly questions. How long have these nests been here? Did Grandma know about them? Why do they look like dead people? What the actual hell is going on? I was about to close the laptop and call it a day when I noticed movement in my peripheral vision, over by the oak tree, near the first nest I'd found. The wasps were more active than usual, dozens of them, maybe more, flying in complex patterns around the nest. As I watched, they began landing on the surface, covering the face completely, then, in perfect synchronization, they all flew away at once. The face had changed, where before it had been a static representation of my grandmother. Now the eyes were wide open, the mouth twisted into an expression I'd never seen on her actual face. Fear. Raw, primal fear. I sat frozen, wine glass halfway to my lips. The rational part of my brain scrambled for explanations. Trick of the light, too much wine, stress from the move, anything but what my eyes were telling me. The wasps returned, covered the face again. When they dispersed, the expression had changed once more. Now the mouth was open in a silent scream. I went inside, locked all the doors, closed all the windows, and for the first time since moving to Millbrook, I wished I was back in my cramped Chicago apartment. That night, I dreamed of paper faces whispering secrets I couldn't quite hear, and somewhere in the walls of the old house, I swear I could hear the sound of chewing. I didn't sleep well that night, or the next, or the one after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those paper faces changing, shifting, screaming. By the fourth day, I'd had enough. I needed answers, and clearly Google wasn't going to provide them, so I did what any rational person would do. I started asking around town. The Millbrook Public Library was a small brick building that smelled like old books and lemon furniture polish. The librarian, a woman in her 60s named Dorothy, brightened when I walked in. "You're Elisa's granddaughter, Sarah, right? I'm so sorry for your loss. Your grandmother was a wonderful woman." "Thank you," I said, trying to figure out how to casually bring up face-shaped wasp nests without sounding completely insane. "I'm actually hoping you might be able to help me with something. I'm trying to learn more about the local wildlife." Dorothy's smile flickered, just for a second. Wildlife? Specifically wasps and their nesting habits. The smile disappeared entirely. Dorothy glanced around the empty library, then leaned in closer. "Have you seen them? The faces?" My heart skipped. "You know about them?" She nodded slowly. "Been happening for, must be 3 years now. Started with just 1 or 2, but lately..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "People don't like to talk about it. Bad for the town's reputation. You understand? But what are they? How is it possible?" Dorothy stood up. "Wait here." She disappeared into a back room and returned with a manila folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, photographs, and what looked like handwritten notes. She spread them across the desk between us. "Your grandmother was investigating them," Dorothy said quietly. "She spent months researching, taking pictures, trying to figure out the pattern." I picked up one of the photographs. It showed Grandma Elise standing next to a massive wasp nest shaped like... I squinted, unsure what I was seeing. The face was incomplete. like a sketch abandoned halfway through. She thought they were building up to something. Dorothy continued. The nests started appearing about 6 months after the Millbrook Cemetery installed that new section, the one near the woods. What does the cemetery have to do with wasps? Dorothy pulled out another photograph. This one showed a section of freshly turned earth, rows of headstones, and in the trees surrounding the cemetery, dozens of gray shapes. Too far away to make out details, but I knew what they were. Every person whose face appears in those nests is buried in that section, Dorothy said. Every single one. I stared at the photos. My mind raced, but I couldn't make the pieces fit together in any way that made sense. That's impossible. Wasps they can't. Your grandmother thought so too. At first. Dorothy pulled out a notebook filled with Grandma's careful handwriting, but she kept watching, documenting. She noticed the wasps weren't just building the nests, they were visiting the graves. What? Early mornings, right after dawn, swarms of them. They'd hover over the headstones for exactly 7 minutes, then fly back to build. She timed them. I flipped through the notebook. Pages and pages of observations. Dates, times, weather conditions. And near the end, a single sentence circled in red ink. They're trying to tell us something. Did she ever figure out what? Dorothy shook her head. She passed before she could, but Sarah. She grabbed my hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. The night before she died, she called me. Said she'd finally understood, said the wasps weren't just building faces of the dead. What do you mean? She said they were building faces of the people who were about to die. The expressions. They show how it happens, how it feels. Dorothy's voice dropped to a whisper. She said she'd seen her own face, and that, by morning, she'd be gone. I pulled my hand away. That's not possible. Your grandmother was found the next morning. A heart attack. Her face. Dorothy paused, swallowed hard. Her face looked exactly like the expression the wasps had built. I left the library with the folder. My hands shook as I drove back to the house. This was insane. Completely insane. Wasps couldn't predict death. They couldn't sculpt faces. They were insects, following instinct and chemical signals. Not some kind of supernatural death prophets. But as I pulled into the driveway, I saw them. A new cluster of wasps, working on something attached to my front porch. I got out of the car slowly, walked closer. The nest was smaller than the others. Fresh, still being built. But I could already see the beginning of features. The curve of a cheek, the hollow of an eye socket. And even half-formed, even incomplete. I recognized the face they were building. It was mine. I stood there on my own front porch, staring at my half-formed paper face, and felt something inside me snap. Not break, exactly. More like shift into focus. Like when you've been looking at one of those magic eye pictures for ages and suddenly the hidden image appears. No, I said out loud, firm, decisive, absolutely not. I marched to the garage and grabbed the longest thing I could find, a rake. Then I climbed onto the porch railing, balanced precariously, and swung at the nest. I missed. The wasps exploded outward in an angry cloud. I flailed, lost my balance, and crashed onto the porch in a heap. The rake clattered away. By the time I scrambled to my feet, the wasps had settled back onto their creation. Unbothered, indifferent. Fine, I muttered, rubbing my bruised elbow. Plan B. Plan B was wasp spray, 2 cans of it. I stood at what I thought was a safe distance and unleashed chemical warfare on the nest. The wasps didn't even seem to notice. They kept building, adding layer after careful layer to my paper death mask. Plan C was the water hose. Plan D was a tennis racket. Plan E involved a very ill-advised attempt with a blowtorch that nearly set the porch on fire. Nothing worked. It was like the wasps existed in some parallel dimension where the laws of pesticide and physics didn't apply. By sunset, I was exhausted, defeated, and sitting on the porch steps with Grandma's research folder spread around me. The wasps had made significant progress. My paper face now had both eyes, a nose, and the beginning of a mouth twisted into an expression I didn't want to interpret. "Okay, Grandma," I said to the empty air. "You figured something out. Help me understand." I read through her notes again, slower this time, looking for patterns I might have missed. And there, in the margin of one page, written in pencil so faint I almost missed it. Not prediction, communication. I sat up straighter, read the note again. Communication. The wasps weren't predicting death. They were, what? Talking to the dead? Delivering messages? I flipped to the back of the notebook. Found a section I'd skimmed earlier. Pages covered in what looked like genealogy charts. Names connected by lines, dates, locations. And at the center of it all, circled 3 times, the Hendricks Apiary, 1952. I pulled out my phone and Googled it. Found a single reference in an archived newspaper from 1952. Local beekeeper Thomas Hendricks had died in a fire that destroyed his hives, his home, and according to the article, released thousands of diseased bees into the surrounding area. Bees, not wasps. But then I found the follow-up article. 2 weeks after the fire, reports of unusual wasp activity, aggressive swarms, strange nesting behaviors, and then nothing. Like the whole thing had been swept under the rug. I kept digging. Found mentions of the land where the cemetery now stood. It had been purchased in 1955, 3 years after the fire. Previously owned by Thomas Hendricks. They built a cemetery on an apiary, I whispered. They built it on contaminated land. But contaminated with what? And what did that have to do with face sculpting wasps? I was so absorbed in research that I didn't notice the humming at first. When I finally looked up, it was full dark. The porch light cast a yellow glow over my paper face, which was now complete, and the expression, I'd expected fear, terror, pain, something that showed how I was going to die. Instead, my paper face looked curious, almost excited, like someone on the verge of understanding something profound. The wasps began to move, not flying, walking, crawling across the surface of the nest in deliberate patterns, forming shapes, letters, W, E, R, E, M, E, M, B, E, R. We remember. The letters dissolved, reformed, T, H, E, Y, F, O, R, G, O, T they forgot. My phone rang, making me jump. Dorothy's name on the screen. "Sarah, are you all right? I've been thinking about our conversation and—" "Dorothy," I interrupted. "The Hendricks Apiary. What happened there?" Silence. Then, "How do you know that name?" "Grandma's notes. What happened?" A long sigh. "My mother told me once, when I was young. Thomas Hendricks wasn't just a beekeeper. He was different. People said he could speak to his bees, understand them. When the fire happened, it wasn't an accident. Someone killed him. The town did. They thought he was unnatural. They burned him with his hives. All those bees, they say you could hear them screaming." I looked at the wasps, still forming words. H-E-L-P-U-S. "Dorothy, I think the wasps aren't predicting deaths. They're trying to remember them, to record them. The faces, the expressions. It's like they're keeping a history of everyone buried on that land. But why your face? You're not—" I understood then. What Grandma had figured out. Why she'd looked excited, not afraid, in her final nest. "They're not showing how I die," I said. "They're showing how I look when I finally understand. When I help them finish what they're trying to do." "Which is?" I stood up, walked closer to my paper face. The wasps didn't scatter, they waited. I think they want justice, or acknowledgement, or maybe just to be remembered correctly, not as diseased bees or supernatural threats, but as victims. Thomas Hendricks and his hives, murdered and forgotten. The wasps rose from the nest in a unified cloud, hovered in front of me, and for just a moment, in their collective movement, I saw him, Thomas Hendricks, made of wings and shadow and 70 years of patient memory. He nodded once and disappeared. When I looked back at the nest, my face had changed. The curious expression remained, but now the mouth was curved into a slight smile, peaceful, satisfied. Over the next few days, all the nests changed. Every face shifted from death expressions to peaceful ones, and then, one by one, they began to fall, crumbling to dust that scattered on the wind, all except one, the first nest I had found. Grandma Elise's face remained on the oak tree, but her expression had changed too. She was smiling now, that knowing smile she used to give me when I'd figured out something important on my own. I had the cemetery add a small plaque to the grounds. It reads, "In memory of Thomas Hendricks and the hives of Hendricks Apiary, 1952. We remember." The wasps still build nests on my property, normal ones, round and proper and face-free. Sometimes I see them visiting the cemetery, early mornings, right after dawn. They hover over Thomas's memorial for exactly 7 minutes. Then they return home. Just wasps again, no longer burdened with preserving memories no one else would keep. And Grandma's nest, it's still there, weathered now, but intact. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I sit on the porch and look at it, and I swear that paper smile gets a little wider, like she's proud of me for finishing what she started, like she knew I would all along. But here's the thing that still keeps me up at night. If the wasps could remember Thomas Hendricks after 70 years, if they could sculpt faces and communicate through paper and patience, what else is out there? What other memories are being kept by creatures we dismiss as simple insects? And in your own backyard, in the corners you never look. What might be watching? Waiting, remembering? Next time you see a wasp nest, look closer. You never know what face might be looking back. Sweet dreams. Story number 3. Listen. I need to tell you something. And before you click away thinking this is just another silly story about laundry, it's not. What happened in my apartment in downtown Portland last October still makes my skin crawl. And if you're listening to this alone, especially at night, maybe grab something to hold on to. Because once you hear what I discovered about my missing socks, you'll never look at your laundry basket the same way again. Are you still there? Good, because someone needs to know the truth. And after you hear this, I have a feeling you'll be checking your own sock drawer tonight. Trust me on that. The story begins now. My name is Marcus Chen, and I've always been the kind of person who notices patterns. Maybe it's because I work as a data analyst for a tech startup in Portland, or maybe I was just born this way. But when something doesn't add up, it bothers me, really bothers me. It started 3 weeks after I moved into my new apartment on Hawthorne Boulevard. Beautiful place. Exposed brick walls. Original hardwood floors from 1923. The kind of character you can't find in those cookie-cutter complexes. The landlady, Mrs. Kowalski. She'd lived in the building her whole life. Sweet old Polish woman who always smelled like pierogi and lavender soap. "You'll love it here," she'd said when handing me the keys. "Quiet building, good neighbors, and the laundry room in the basement has brand new machines." She was right about everything. Well, almost everything. The first time I noticed it, I thought I was just being careless. You know how it is. You throw your laundry in the machine, scroll through your phone while it washes, transfer everything to the dryer without really paying attention. But when I got back to my apartment and started folding, I was missing a sock, just one. A plain black athletic sock, nothing special. I shrugged it off. Everyone loses socks in the laundry, right? It's like a universal law or something. The dryer eats them. They slip behind the machine. Whatever. I made a mental note to check behind the dryer next time I was down there, but then it happened again the following week. This time, a blue wool sock. My favorite pair, actually. The ones I wore when I went hiking at Mount Hood. Again, just one sock missing, not the pair, just the left one. By the third week, I was paying attention, really paying attention. I counted my socks before taking them downstairs. 12 pairs, 24 individual socks. I even used a mesh bag. You know, one of those delicate garment bags. Zipped it up tight. Watched the washer the entire cycle. Transferred everything immediately to the dryer. Stood there for the full 45 minutes like some kind of laundry guardian. When I opened the dryer, I counted again. 23 socks, one missing. Always just one. I started keeping a log. Yeah, I know how that sounds. But like I said, patterns bother me. Over the next month, I documented everything. Date, time, type of sock, which foot it belonged to. And that's when I noticed the first really weird thing. It was always the left sock. Always. Now, that might not seem strange to you, but think about it. If socks were randomly getting lost in the machine, eaten by the dryer monster or whatever, wouldn't it be random? Sometimes left, sometimes right? But no. 22 missing socks over 6 weeks, all left feet. I mentioned it to my neighbor, Janet, while we were both grabbing mail one evening. She worked as a nurse at OHSU, practical, no-nonsense type of person. "You too?" she said, and something in her voice made me look up from the credit card offer I was pretending to read. I thought I was going crazy. Started buying all the same socks so I wouldn't notice. But yeah, always the left ones. We compared notes right there in the hallway. Same pattern, once a week, sometimes twice. Always during evening laundry runs. Always left socks. "Have you talked to Mrs. Kowalski about it?" I asked. Janet shook her head. What am I going to say? Hey, your dryer has a preference for left-footed socks? She'd think I'd lost it. She had a point. But still, the whole thing bugged me. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I kept running through logical explanations. Maybe there was something wrong with the dryer's rotation, creating a gap on one side where smaller items could slip through. Maybe the building had a weird tilt that made things drift to one corner. Maybe. Then, exactly 7 weeks after I'd moved in, something changed. I'd just finished a particularly long day at work, debugging code until my eyes burned, and decided to do laundry despite being exhausted. It was past 10 p.m. when I trudged down to the basement, laundry basket balanced on my hip, podcast playing in my earbuds. The basement always creeped me out a little, not in a horror movie way, just, you know that feeling? Like you're not supposed to be somewhere? The fluorescent lights hummed and flickered, casting weird shadows between the storage units. The air smelled like fabric softener and something else. Something earthy and old. I loaded my clothes, started the machine, and headed back upstairs. 45 minutes later, I returned to switch everything to the dryer. That's when I saw it. A sock, my sock, the blue wool one that had gone missing 3 weeks ago. It was sitting on top of the dryer, folded neatly in half, and it was inside out. I stood there for probably 30 seconds, just staring at it. My brain trying to process what I was seeing, because here's the thing. I'm particular about my socks, always have been. I never wear them inside out. The seams bug me, and I definitely never fold them inside out. But there it was, my missing sock, returned. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands. It was definitely mine. I recognized a tiny hole near the toe that I'd been meaning to darn, but it felt different. The fabric was stiffer somehow, like it had been starched, and there was that smell again. That earthy smell I'd noticed in the basement. Stronger now, like wet soil and something else. Something organic. I should have thrown it away. That's what a rational person would have done, right? But I was too curious. I tucked it into my pocket and finished my laundry, counting my socks twice. 24 went in, 23 came out. My green running sock, gone. Back in my apartment. I examined the returned sock under my desk lamp. That's when I noticed the first really disturbing thing. The inside, the part that should have touched my foot, was covered in tiny marks. Scratches. No, not scratches. They were too uniform, too deliberate. They looked like teeth marks. Hundreds of tiny teeth marks. I didn't sleep well that night. Kept thinking about those marks, about where my sock had been for 3 weeks. And worse, wondering where my other missing socks were. Would they come back too? And if they did, what condition would they be in? The next morning, Saturday, I knocked on Janet's door. She answered in her scrubs, about to head to work. "This is going to sound crazy," I started. She held up a hand. "If it's about the socks, nothing sounds crazy anymore." She glanced down the hallway, then stepped back. "Come in, quick." Her apartment was the mirror image of mine, but cluttered with medical textbooks and houseplants. She led me to her kitchen table, where a shoebox sat in the center. "They started coming back 2 days ago," she said, lifting the lid. Inside were 6 socks, all left feet, all inside out, all with those same tiny marks. "I haven't told anyone," she continued. "Who would believe me? But Marcus, I did some research at the hospital. Used the microscope in the lab after hours." She pulled out her phone, showed me a photo, magnified dozens of times. The marks were clearer, definitely teeth, but not from any animal I recognized. Too many, too small, arranged in perfect concentric circles. "What the hell has been chewing on our socks?" I whispered. Janet shook her head. "That's not the worst part. I tested one for DNA, just basic stuff. Thought maybe it was rats or something. But Marcus," she met my eyes. "The only DNA I found was human, but altered somehow, degraded, like it had been digested." We decided to stake out the laundry room that night. I know. It sounds like something out of a bad horror movie, but what else could we do? Call the cops? "Hi, officer. Someone's been stealing our socks and returning them chewed up?" They'd laugh us out of the station. Janet got off work at 11. We met in the hallway, both armed with flashlights and phones. The basement door creaked as we opened it, and I swear the temperature dropped 10 degrees as we descended. The laundry room was empty, machines silent. We positioned ourselves behind a row of storage units where we could see both the washers and dryers. Then we waited. Midnight came and went. Then 1 a.m. I was starting to think we were idiots, that maybe we'd imagined the whole thing, when Janet grabbed my arm. "Listen," she breathed. At first, nothing. Then I heard it, a sound like scratching, no, scurrying, coming from inside the walls. The scratching grew louder, moving along the wall towards the dryers. Then, silence. We held our breath, waiting. A minute passed, 2, just when I thought whatever it was had gone. I saw movement. A panel at the base of the dryer, one I'd never noticed before, was sliding open. Just a crack at first, then wider, and something reached out. It wasn't a hand. Not exactly. It was too long, too thin, with too many joints, pale, almost translucent, like something that had never seen sunlight. The fingers, if you could call them that, ended in tiny circular mouths, each one lined with rings of minute teeth. The thing grabbed the edge of the panel, pulled, and more of it emerged. An arm, impossibly long, unfolding from the small space like a horrifying magic trick, then another arm, and another, and another. I must have made a sound, because suddenly the arms froze. Then, slowly, something else emerged from the opening. A head, kind of, hairless, pale, with features that were almost human but stretched all wrong. And the eyes, God, the eyes were huge, black, reflecting our flashlight beams like a deer on a dark road. It looked right at us. Janet's hand tightened on my arm, her nails digging in. Neither of us moved, couldn't move. The thing tilted its head, studying us with those awful eyes. Then its mouth opened, revealing row after row of circular teeth, just like the ones on its fingers. And it smiled. You know that moment in nightmares when you try to scream but nothing comes out? That's exactly what happened. My mouth opened, my lungs pulled in air, but my vocal cords just wouldn't work. The thing continued to unfold itself from that impossible space. More arms. A torso that bent in ways that made my eyes hurt to follow. Legs that were jointed like a spider's. All of it that same translucent white, like raw chicken skin, but with something dark pulsing underneath. Veins, or something else. It moved toward the nearest dryer, those finger mouths making soft sucking sounds against the concrete floor. When it reached the machine, it did something I'll never forget. It sang, not with its main mouth, but with all those tiny mouths on its fingers. A harmonized humming that made my teeth ache. The dryer door swung open on its own. Janet finally found her voice. A soft whimper, barely audible, but it was enough. The thing's head snapped toward us, too fast, like a film jumping frames. Those black eyes narrowed, and then it spoke. Watchers. Its voice was like fabric tearing. We don't like watchers. That broke the spell. Janet and I bolted, scrambling over each other to get to the stairs. Behind us, that horrible scurrying sound multiplied. Not just one set of those awful limbs, but many. How many of these things were living in our walls? We burst through the basement door, slammed it behind us. I fumbled for my keys, hands shaking so bad I dropped them twice. From below, scratching. The doorknob began to turn. "Your apartment," Janet hissed. We ran, threw ourselves inside, locked the door, added the chain, pushed my couch against it for good measure. Then we sat on my living room floor, breathing hard, trying to process what we'd just seen. "We have to tell someone," I gasped. "Tell them what?" Janet laughed. But it was brittle, hysterical. That there's a thing in the basement that eats socks? That it has finger mouths and lives in the walls? She was right. No one would believe us. Hell, I'd seen it and I barely believed it. We stayed up all night, taking turns watching the door. Every sound made us jump. Every creak of the old building sounded like those things moving through the walls. When dawn finally came, we were exhausted but alive. "I'm moving out," Janet said. "Today, I don't care if I lose my deposit." I nodded. "Yeah, me too." But when we tried to leave, Mrs. Kowalski was waiting in the hallway. She stood there in her housecoat and slippers. But something was different. Her usual grandmotherly smile seemed strained. And her eyes, had they always been that dark? "Good morning, children," she said. Her voice was the same, but underneath, I heard something else, a harmony, like multiple voices speaking in unison. "I heard you had some excitement last night." Janet and I exchanged glances. "We were just," I started, "in the laundry room." "Yes, I know." Mrs. Kowalski tilted her head, exactly the way that thing had. "You saw something you weren't supposed to see. That's unfortunate." "We're leaving," Janet said firmly. "Today," Mrs. Kowalski sighed. "Oh, my dear, I'm afraid that's not possible. You see, you've been marked now. They know your scent, your flavor." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. She smiled, and for just a second, I saw too many teeth. The building has to eat, Marcus. It's been here so much longer than you know, and it developed appetites. We reached an arrangement decades ago, small sacrifices, socks, underwear sometimes, items that hold human essence. In exchange, it doesn't take the humans themselves. You're insane, Janet whispered. Am I? Mrs. Kowalski reached into her pocket, pulled out a sock. My green running sock. The one that went missing last night. It was already inside out, already marked with those terrible teeth marks. They process them, extract what they need. Usually, they return them as a courtesy. A sign the feeding was satisfactory. She held it out to me. I didn't take it. But you had to go looking, she continued. Had to see them during feeding time. Now they're agitated, hungry for more than just fabric. The walls around us began to creak, not the normal settling of an old building, but deliberate, rhythmic, like breathing. However, Mrs. Kowalski said, we can make a new arrangement. You can stay, live your lives, even do your laundry. Just don't go to the basement after dark. Don't ask questions. And when your socks go missing, be grateful that's all you're losing. And if we refuse? I asked. Her smile faded. Then I'm afraid you'll discover why this building has such reasonable rent and why the previous tenants left so suddenly. Janet grabbed my hand. We'll stay. We'll follow the rules. Mrs. Kowalski brightened. Wonderful. I knew you were smart ones. Oh, and one more thing. They particularly enjoyed your socks. Marcus, the running ones especially. Something about the fear sweat gives them extra flavor. So maybe buy some extras. She shuffled away, humming that same horrible harmony under her breath. That was 6 months ago. Janet moved out the next week, middle of the night, didn't even say goodbye. I don't blame her. I tried to leave too, but every apartment I looked at, every room for rent, something always went wrong. The applications got lost, the landlords never called back, or worse, I'd catch glimpses of pale shapes in the shadows, watching, waiting. They wanted me to stay, and eventually, I stopped trying to leave. I follow the rules now. Do my laundry during daylight hours only. Never go to the basement after sunset. When my socks disappear, and they still do, I wait patiently for their return. They always come back eventually. Inside out, marked. Smelling of earth and something organic I try not to think about. But the rules are changing. Last month, they started taking more, not just socks, but shirts, underwear, always returning them inside out, always marked. The teeth marks are getting deeper, more aggressive. And last week, I found something that made my blood run cold. A note tucked inside a returned sock, written in what looked like rust, or maybe dried blood. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. Help me, Sarah Chen, 1987. They don't just eat the clothes. Chen, my last name, and 1987. That was the year my older sister was born, the sister my parents never talk about, the one who supposedly died as a baby. I confronted Mrs. Kowalski yesterday, found her in her apartment, surrounded by photo albums dating back decades, pictures of the building, the tenants, all smiling, all unaware. Marcus, I wondered when you'd come. She didn't look up from the photos. You want to know about Sarah? It wasn't a question. Your parents lived here, briefly, 1987 to 1988, lovely couple, but they broke the rules, went investigating, just like you did. She turned a page. The building was hungrier then, less civilized. It took the baby first, just opened up the nursery wall and took her. My legs felt weak. She's alive? Define alive. Mrs. Kowalski finally looked at me. The building doesn't exactly digest things the way you'd think. It incorporates them, transforms them. Your sister, she's part of it now, part of them. Has been for 36 years. The note. Oh yes, sometimes the absorbed ones. They remember. Brief moments of clarity. They try to communicate through the only method available. She gestured at my feet. The clothes. The items that pass between our world and theirs. I stared at her. How do you know all this? She smiled, that too wide smile. Because, Marcus, I was the first. 1943, I was 7 years old when the building took me, but it needed someone on this side, someone to manage things. So it sent me back, changed, but functional. Her form flickered, just for a second, and I saw what she really was. A shell, a puppet made of old skin and borrowed bones, held together by something that pulsed beneath, something that connected her to the walls, the floors, the things in the basement. Your sister wants out, she continued. They all do, but the only way out is to trade places. One soul for another. The building must eat, Marcus. It must always eat. I'm still here, still in the building, still losing socks. But now I know the truth. Every missing piece of clothing, every item that disappears and returns inside out, it's been touched by them, by the absorbed ones, by my sister. The notes keep coming, desperate messages, fragments of memories, pictures drawn in substances I don't want to identify. She's trying to tell me something, trying to show me a way, but the building is getting suspicious. The walls watch me now. I can feel them breathing when I sleep. Mrs. Kowalski says I have a choice. Stay and follow the rules, or join my sister, become one of them, spend eternity crawling through walls, feeding on the essence of human fear soaked into fabric. But there's a third option, one Sarah's been hinting at, one that involves the original blueprints I found in the city archives, the ones that show a room that shouldn't exist, a door that was sealed in 1943, the year Mrs. Kowalski was taken. Tomorrow night, during the new moon, when the building sleeps deepest, I'm going to find that door. Either I'll free my sister and the others, or I'll join them. But I can't keep living like this. Can't keep pretending that missing socks are the worst of my problems. If you're listening to this, if you live in an old building where things go missing, where socks disappear and return inside out, pay attention. Check your walls, count your clothes. And whatever you do, never go investigating after dark. Because the buildings are hungry. They've always been hungry, and they're learning to take more than just socks. I have to go now. The sun is setting, and I can hear them moving in the walls, scratching, calling. They know I'm planning something. They can smell my fear, and they're excited. But before I go, let me ask you something. Have you checked your laundry lately? Really checked it? Count your socks? Are they all there? Are they all right side out? Because if not, if even one is missing, or if one came back changed, then they know about you too, and they're already inside your walls. Sweet dreams. Wait, do you hear that? That scratching sound? Is it coming from your walls? Or mine? Check your socks. Right now, count them all. And if you're brave enough, if you really want to know the truth, leave a comment below. Tell me what you found. Tell me if your socks are all there. Tell me if any came back, inside out, because I have a feeling I'm not the only one, and they're spreading. The buildings are networking now, sharing techniques, trading, resources. Your building might be next, or maybe it already is. Check your socks. Story number 4. You know that feeling when you look through a peephole and the world outside seems wrong? Like everything's been shifted half an inch to the left while you weren't looking? That's how it started for me. 3 nights ago, in my new apartment in Portland, Maine, not Oregon. Everyone always assumes Oregon. I'm standing here right now, my eye pressed against that tiny circle of glass, watching someone who looks exactly like my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, water her petunias. Except Mrs. Chen doesn't have petunias. She has roses, red ones, and the woman outside. She's watering them at 2:47 in the morning. If you're still listening after I tell you what I found, what I'm still finding, please leave a comment. Tell me I'm not losing my mind. Tell me you see it too, because I need to know someone else understands before I open this door. All right, here's where the story really begins. Tuesday night, that's when everything went sideways. I'd just moved into Unit 4B at the Riverside Commons, one of those converted mill buildings that Portland seems to have on every corner. Red brick, exposed beams, the whole 9 yards. Trendy enough to justify the rent, old enough to have character. Or so the landlord kept saying. I was unpacking boxes, you know how it is. That first week shuffle where nothing has a place yet and you're eating takeout off paper plates because you can't find your actual dishes. The Chinese place down the street, Ming's Garden, they'd messed up my order. Given me sweet and sour chicken instead of General Tso's. I almost didn't check the peephole when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Almost. But living alone, you develop habits. Check the peephole, chain on the door, keys between your fingers when you walk to your car at night. Basic stuff. So I looked. Mrs. Chen was out there, standing perfectly still in the hallway. Not moving toward her door, not checking her mail, just standing, facing my door. I watched for maybe 10 seconds before she turned and walked away. Weird, but whatever. New building, new neighbors. People are allowed to be odd. I went back to my sweet and sour chicken, which actually wasn't bad, and tried to figure out which box had my work clothes for tomorrow. The investment firm I work for, Harrington and Associates. They're particular about the dress code. No wrinkled shirts, no scuffed shoes. Appearances matter when you're handling other people's money. Around 11, I was brushing my teeth when I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow ones. The kind that make you pause mid-brush and listen. They stopped right outside my door. I crept to the peephole, toothbrush still in my mouth, foam dripping down my chin. Professional, right? But something felt off. You know that feeling. That little alarm bell in the back of your head that says, pay attention. Mrs. Chen again. Same spot, same stance. But this time, she was holding something. A watering can. One of those old metal ones with the long spout. She stood there for maybe 30 seconds, then turned and walked away. Okay. Weird became concerning. I finished brushing, double-checked my locks, and tried to shake it off. New place jitters, we all get them. The radiator clanked. Old building sounds. And I told myself I was being paranoid. Mrs. Chen was probably just, I don't know. Elderly people do odd things sometimes. My grandmother used to reorganize her spice rack at 3 in the morning. But when I finally crawled into bed, I couldn't stop thinking about that watering can. Who waters plants at 11 at night? And why stop outside my door to do it? Wednesday felt normal. Work was work. Numbers on screens, phone calls about portfolios. The usual Wednesday morning meeting where Davidson droned on about market projections. I even grabbed lunch with my coworker Sarah at that new place on Commercial Street. Good lobster roll. Overpriced, but good. You look tired, Sarah said, stealing one of my fries. She always did that. 3 years of working together and she still couldn't just order her own fries. New apartment, I said. Still getting used to the sounds. Where'd you end up again? Riverside Commons, the old Brackett Mill building. She made a face. Isn't that place like super old? 1897, I said. But they renovated it. It's actually pretty nice, exposed brick, original hardwood. And weird neighbors? I laughed. Told her about Mrs. Chen and the midnight gardening. Sarah thought it was hilarious. Said I should start a blog. Crazy things my neighbors do. We joked about it the whole walk back to the office. By the time I got home that evening, I'd almost forgotten about the whole thing. Almost. But habits, remember? I checked the peephole before settling in for the night. Empty hallway. Normal. Good. I heated up leftover Chinese. The sweet and sour had grown on me. And settled in to watch something mindless on Netflix. One of those home renovation shows where people knock down walls and pretend to be surprised by what they find. Comfortable. Safe. Around 10:30, I was dozing on the couch when I heard it. The footsteps. They had a rhythm now. Step, step, stop, step, step, stop. Like someone was counting tiles. I didn't move at first, told myself it was probably just someone coming home late, but the steps stopped outside my door. Again. And stayed there, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. Nobody stands outside someone's door for 3 minutes without knocking. Nobody normal, anyway. I crept to the peephole, staying low like whoever was out there might somehow see me looking. Stupid, I know. That's not how peepholes work, but fear makes you irrational. Mrs. Chen, same position, same watering can. But this time, she was looking directly at the peephole, like she knew I was watching. Her eyes were wrong. I couldn't tell you exactly how, the distortion of the lens maybe, but they looked too bright, too focused. She smiled. Then she raised the watering can and tilted it toward my door. I heard the water hit the floor. Steady stream, like she was watering my doormat. What do you do in that situation? Call the police? Hello, 911? My elderly neighbor is watering my doormat. They'd think I was insane. Confront her, open the door, and ask what she was doing? Something deep in my gut said that was a bad idea. A very bad idea. So I watched. Watched her empty that entire watering can onto my doormat. Watched her lower it, never breaking eye contact with the peephole. Watched her turn and walk away, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Step, step, stop, step, step, stop. When I finally opened my door, just a crack, chain still on. My doormat was bone dry. I didn't sleep that night, how could I? Every sound became footsteps. Every settling of the building became someone standing outside my door. I must have checked that peephole 20 times between midnight and dawn. Nothing. Just empty hallway and the faint buzz of the fluorescent light that maintenance never quite fixed. Thursday morning came whether I was ready or not. I stood at my door for a full minute before leaving for work, ear pressed against the wood, listening. Nothing. Coast clear. I yanked the door open fast, like ripping off a Band-Aid, and nearly jumped out of my skin when I saw it. A flower, a single red rose, laid precisely in the center of my doormat. The doormat that should have been soaked but wasn't. I stared at it, picked it up, turned it over in my hands. Fresh cut, droplets of morning dew still clinging to the petals. The stem had been trimmed at a perfect 45-degree angle. Professional, like from a flower shop. Mrs. Chen's door opened. I shoved the rose in my bag and smiled at her as she emerged. Normal, act normal. Just neighbors saying good morning. Good morning, Mrs. Chen. She looked at me, through me. Her face was pleasant enough, wrinkled in all the right places, silver hair pinned back in a neat bun, but her eyes. In the daylight, I could see what had seemed wrong through the peephole. They were too young, too sharp. Like someone had transplanted a 20-year-old's eyes into an 80-year-old's face. Good morning, dear, she said. Her voice was exactly what you'd expect. Warm. Grandmotherly. Did you sleep well? Like a baby, I lied. She smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't reach those too young eyes. That's good. Sleep is so important. You never know what you might miss when you're sleeping. She shuffled past me toward the elevator, and I caught a scent of something. Not old lady perfume, not mothballs or whatever stereotype you're thinking. It smelled like earth, fresh turned soil, like a garden after rain. Work was a blur. I couldn't focus. Sarah asked if I was okay during lunch, and I showed her the rose. Told her about the watering can that didn't leave water, the doormat that should have been wet. She laughed, but it was nervous laughter. The kind that says, "I'm humoring you, but this is getting weird." "Maybe she likes you," Sarah suggested. "You know, in a sweet old lady way, my grandmother used to leave cookies for all her neighbors." "At 3 in the morning? Okay, that part's weird." I left work early, told Davidson I had a migraine. He barely looked up from his computer, just waved me off. The benefits of being a reliable employee, they don't question the occasional early exit. But I didn't go home. Not right away. Instead, I sat in my car in the parking garage and did something I should have done days ago. I Googled Riverside Commons, Portland, Maine strange, and variations thereof. Nothing, a few articles about the renovation, some listings on apartment websites, one historical piece about the original mill, but nothing strange, nothing about weird neighbors or midnight gardening or roses that appear from nowhere. I was about to give up when I tried one more search. Brackett Mill, Portland, Maine history. Third result down. A small article from the Portland Daily Sun dated October 15, 1973. The headline made my stomach drop. Brackett mill worker disappears, investigation ongoing. The article was brief. A mill worker named Chen Wu had vanished during the night shift. His wife reported him missing when he didn't come home. Police found no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play, just gone. The article mentioned he'd been complaining to co-workers about strange things, seeing people who weren't there, hearing machines running when the mill was closed. His wife's name was Margaret Chen. I sat there in my car, engine running, staring at that article on my phone. Margaret Chen, 1973. That would make her, what? Over 100 years old if she was still alive? The rational part of my brain kicked in. Common name, coincidence, had to be. The Mrs. Chen in my building was maybe 80, elderly but not impossibly old. And Chen wasn't exactly rare in a city like Portland. There were 3 Chen families in my building alone. But that smell, earth, garden soil, and those eyes. I drove home as the sun set, painting the Portland skyline in shades of orange and red. The Riverside Commons looked different in that light. Older. The renovated facade couldn't quite hide the building's age. The way the shadows fell made the windows look like eyes. Watching. Waiting. The parking garage was nearly empty. Thursday night, most people were probably out to dinner, living their normal lives, doing normal things. Not Googling disappeared mill workers and connecting dots that probably didn't connect. I took the stairs. Didn't trust myself in the enclosed space of the elevator. Too easy to imagine Mrs. Chen stepping in on the 3rd floor, smiling that not quite right smile, asking about my sleep. The stairwell echoed with my footsteps. 4 flights, 64 steps. I counted. Anything to keep my mind busy, anything to avoid thinking about what might be waiting in the hallway. But the 4th floor was empty. Just the buzz of that dying fluorescent. The faint smell of someone's dinner, garlic and onions, coming from 4D normal. Everything was normal. I made it to my door without incident. Key in the lock, quick turn, inside, safe. Except I wasn't. Because there, on my kitchen counter, sat a watering can. Old metal with a long spout. Exactly like the one Mrs. Chen had been carrying. And next to it, arranged in a perfect circle, were 12 red roses. My door had been locked, I was sure of it. The deadbolt, the chain, everything exactly as I'd left it. The windows were sealed, painted shut years ago, according to the landlord. No other way in. But there they were. Roses and a watering can. Waiting for me. I backed against the door, hand fumbling for my phone. Call someone, anyone. Police. Sarah. My mother in California who'd told me not to move to the East Coast. That's when I noticed the water. A trail of droplets leading from the kitchen to the hallway, toward my bedroom. Tiny puddles on the hardwood, each one perfectly round. like someone had walked through my apartment with a dripping watering can. I followed them. What else could I do? Run? To where? This was my home, my safe space. If I couldn't be safe here. The trail led to my bedroom door, closed. I always left it open. Always. Old habit from childhood. Closed doors made me claustrophobic. I reached for the handle, stopped, listened, breathing. Slow, steady. Someone was in my bedroom. Breathing. The rational thing would have been to leave. Run. Call 911 from the hallway. Let someone with a gun and a badge deal with whoever was in my bedroom. But I had to know, had to see, because nothing about this was rational. Watering cans that appeared from nowhere. Roses arranged in perfect circles. An 80-year-old woman who might be over 100. I turned the handle, pushed the door open. My bedroom was empty, but the window, the painted, shut, sealed for decades window, was wide open. Curtains billowing in the October wind, and on the windowsill, perfectly balanced, sat a single photograph. Black and white, aged. Corners yellowed and curling. It showed the bracket mill, circa 1900-something. Workers posed in front of the building, serious faces staring at the camera. And there, in the third row, stood a man who looked exactly like the newspaper photo of Chen Wu. Same face, same posture, same everything. But the photo was dated 1903, 70 years before Chen Wu disappeared. I picked it up with shaking hands, turned it over. Someone had written on the back in faded pencil, "The garden always needs tending. MC. MC Margaret Chen." I don't remember dropping the photo, don't remember backing out of the room. But suddenly, I was in my hallway again, grabbing my keys, my phone, my wallet, getting out. I had to get out. I yanked open my door and nearly screamed. Mrs. Chen stood inches from my threshold, smiling, holding a watering can. My watering can, the one that should have been on my kitchen counter. Water dripped steadily from the spout. "Going somewhere, dear?" Her voice was still warm, still grandmotherly, but underneath it was something else, something older. "The roses need water. It would be such a shame to let them die." I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only watch as she raised the watering can and began to pour. The water hit my feet, soaking through my shoes. Cold. So cold, it burned. "Your apartment has such lovely light," she continued, still pouring. "Perfect for growing things. The last tenant thought so too, and the one before that. And the one before that. The water kept coming, more than any watering can could hold. It pooled around my feet, crept across my floor. And in it, I saw things. Reflections that weren't quite right. Faces that weren't quite there. We all need tending, Mrs. Chen said. Some of us just need it more than others." She lowered the can, stepped back. The water vanished like it had never been there, leaving only the memory of cold. "Sleep well, dear. You know where to find me when you're ready." She shuffled away down the hall. Step, step, stop, step, step, stop. I slammed the door, threw the deadbolt, slid the chain. Then I did the only thing that made sense. I looked through the peephole. The hallway outside wasn't my hallway. It was a garden. Rows and rows of roses stretching as far as the curved lens could show. Red ones, white ones, pink ones, all perfectly maintained. All growing in impossible directions. And walking among them, watering can in hand, was Mrs. Chen. But also not Mrs. Chen. She was younger, older, different, the same. Multiple versions of her tending the same impossible garden. She turned, looked directly at the peephole, all of her versions, all at once, and smiled. "I'm still here, still looking through the peephole. It's been, I don't know, hours, days. Time moves differently when you're watching impossible things. The garden changes. Sometimes it's roses, sometimes it's other things. Plants I don't recognize, flowers that shouldn't exist. And always, Mrs. Chen is there, tending, watering, watching. I've tried not looking, tried covering the peephole, but I always come back. Have to come back. Because what if I miss something? What if the answer is out there and I just haven't seen it yet? My phone says it's Thursday, still Thursday, but that can't be right. The sun has set and risen at least twice through my windows. Or maybe that's wrong too. Maybe the windows show lies just like the peephole. Sarah called. I think. The phone rang and her name appeared, but when I answered, all I heard was the sound of water dripping. Steady, rhythmic, like a watering can that never empties. I found more photographs. They appear when I'm not looking. Sliding under my door. Materializing on my coffee table, all from different decades, all showing the same man. Chen Wu, 1903, 1924, 1947, 1968. Always the same face, always the same serious expression, and always on the back the same message. The garden always needs tending. MC. I think I understand now, or maybe understanding is the wrong word. Maybe acceptance is better. The bracket mill never stopped operating, it just changed what it produced. Not textiles, not fabric, something else. Something that grows in gardens that exist between spaces, in the gap between what's inside and what's outside. I looked up Chen Wu again. Dug deeper, found things that weren't there before. Or maybe were always there and I couldn't see them. He didn't disappear in 1973. He disappeared in 1903, and 1924, and 1947, and 1968. Always October. Always the night shift. Always leaving behind a wife named Margaret, who insisted he'd be back, who kept tending her garden, who waited. And waited, and waited. The water under my door has started to pool again. It doesn't evaporate, doesn't sink into the floor. Just sits there, reflecting things that aren't in my apartment. Each droplet is a tiny window, a tiny peephole, and in each one, I see the garden. I should leave, pack my things and run, find a new apartment, a new city, a new life. But I can't, because now I've seen it, the garden. Mrs. Chen, the truth of what grows in the spaces between. And once you've seen it, you're part of it. Another flower that needs tending. Another rose in her impossible garden. My doormat is soaked now. Finally. The water has nowhere else to go but in. Under the door, across my floor, bringing with it the smell of earth and growing things. I think when it reaches me I'll understand completely. Why Chen Wu keeps disappearing. Why Mrs. Chen keeps tending. Why the peephole shows different truths to different people. The garden always needs tending, and gardeners need helpers. I can hear her footsteps in the hall, step, step, stop, step, step, stop, getting closer. She's humming something, an old song. Maybe from 1903, maybe from yesterday. Time doesn't matter in the garden. I should be afraid, was afraid. But now there's just curiosity. What will I see when I open the door? Which Mrs. Chen will be there? Which version of the truth? The water is at my feet now. Cold, so cold it burns, but also warm. Like summer soil, like things growing, like life and death and the space between. She's at my door. I can see her through the peephole. All of her. Young Margaret from 1903 waiting for her husband to come home from the mill. Old Mrs. Chen from today, watering flowers that shouldn't exist. And everything in between, every moment, every version, every truth. She's knocking, soft, polite, the way a neighbor knocks when they need to borrow sugar, when they want to chat, when they have something to show you. It's time, dear, she says. All of her says, in harmony, in discord, in the space between sound and silence. My hand is on the doorknob. When did that happen? When did I stand up? When did I decide? Or maybe I decided the moment I looked through the peephole that first night. Maybe we all decide the moment we choose to see. To really see. to look at the world and notice the spaces between what should be and what is. The door is opening. I'm opening it. Or it's opening itself. Or it was always open and I'm just now noticing. Mrs. Chen smiles, holds out the watering can. The roses are thirsty, she says. They've been waiting for you. Behind her, the hallway is gone, just garden. Miles and miles of impossible garden. And in the distance, I can see others. Tending, watering. People from every decade, every version of every person who ever looked through their peephole and saw the truth. Chen Wu is there. He waves. He looks exactly like his photographs, all of them, at once. I take the watering can. It's heavier than it should be, or lighter, or both. The water inside moves like it's alive, like it's waiting. Where do I start? I ask. My voice sounds far away, like an echo, like a memory. Wherever you like, dear, Mrs. Chen says. The garden tends itself. We just help it along. I step into the hallway, into the garden, into the space between. The door closes behind me, or stays open, or was never there. And somewhere, in an apartment that exists and doesn't exist, a new tenant will move in. They'll unpack their boxes, order Chinese food, hear footsteps in the hall late at night. They'll look through the peephole, and they'll see, well, that depends on them, doesn't it? On what they're ready to see, on what the garden needs them to see. But if you're listening to this, if you've made it this far, then maybe you're ready too. Maybe you've noticed the spaces in your own life, the moments that don't quite fit, the neighbors who aren't quite right, the flowers that appear where no flowers should be. Check your peephole tonight. Really look. Not just a glance, but a real look. See what's actually there, and what's not there, and what's in between. But be careful, because once you see it, once you really see it, the garden always needs tending, and we always need more gardeners. Sweet dreams. If you can still sleep after hearing this, leave a comment below. Tell me what you see through your peephole. Tell me about your neighbors, your gardens, your impossible spaces. Because I'm betting you've already started to notice things. Haven't you? And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories from the spaces between, hit that subscribe button. Ring the notification bell, because the garden has so many stories to tell, so many flowers to tend, so many doors to open. Until next time, keep watching, keep listening, keep looking through those peepholes. You never know what you might see or what might see you. Now, sleep. Or at least, try to. It's quiet now, too quiet, but not empty. That feeling crawling up your spine, that weight pressing on your chest, that's not your imagination. You're not alone. There's something behind the curtain. You haven't looked, not because you forgot, but because you're afraid to know. You heard the whisper, soft where wet, wrong. Like breath dragged across broken glass. But you told yourself it was the wind, didn't you? That lie made you feel safe. Temporarily. Let me ask you, does the wind whisper your name? Does the wind tap lightly, again and again, from the same spot behind the curtain every night? Does the wind leave scratches on your window that weren't there this morning? Thin, sharp, like claws, like warnings. You don't remember opening the window. You never open the window. But it's unlocked now. You could check, you could stand up, you could walk over and pull the curtain back. But you won't, because you know. You know what's waiting, not because you've seen it, but because you felt it. In the quiet, in the dark. Every time you close your eyes, every time you wake up and your blanket is just slightly moved. Your door slightly cracked. You try to explain it. Your mind wants to explain it. But that whisper, that sound that only comes when you're alone, when everything is still, when the night is at its deepest, that's not a dream, that's a presence. It doesn't want your fear, it wants your attention. It feeds on the moment you doubt yourself. The second you wonder if you heard something, the instant your heart rate rises. That's when it leans closer. It's been patient, watching, learning you like prey. You ever notice it never shows up when the lights are on, when someone's in the room? It waits for the ritual, the brushing of your teeth, the turning off of lights, the last look at your phone, the deep breath just before sleep. That's when it wakes up. That's when it stirs behind the curtain. Sometimes it watches you all night. Sometimes it moves. A shift in the shadow. A faint creak on the floorboards. The sound of fabric sliding over skin. And when you don't check, when you ignore it, that's when it comes closer. Not fast, not loud, just closer. You might feel a cold spot on the bed. You might feel breath on your neck. You might hear a whisper in your ear that sounds almost like your voice. It copies, it mimics, it blends, not to confuse you, to prepare you, because soon it won't need the curtain, it won't need shadows, it will sit beside you, stand behind you, speak through you. You won't even know when it happens. You'll wake up, look in the mirror, and something will be off. Your eyes won't blink quite right, your smile will linger too long. Your reflection will move just a little after you do. And the people around you? They'll say you seem different. Not worse, just not you. But tonight you're still you. Still in control, for now. You could still check. You could still confront it. Pull the curtain back, face it, but deep down, you've already made your choice. You won't. Because you'd rather lie still, let your eyes drift shut, and hope sleep comes quickly. And it will. But what you wake up as might not be the same. Now, if you've made it this far, congratulations. You're not just a viewer, you're part of something bigger. Something that watches with you, that sits beside you as you watch, as you listen, as you wait. Because this story doesn't end when the screen fades to black. It follows you into the next room, into your dreams, into your reflection. If you liked this story, like, share, and subscribe, so you don't miss the next one, so we don't miss you. And comment below. Tell us the moment you stopped feeling alone. We're watching, we're listening, and we read everything. Now, go ahead, gain the courage to check the dark corners before you sleep. Turn off the lights, close your eyes, sleep well, if you can.